The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And we're going to be talking about money. Now, if you've been listening to the news that just came on, they announced that the stock market had plunged. It had taken a big plunge. Now, wait a minute. Let's put this in perspective. The market was down 270 points. We're at 22,000 or just under 22,000. That's a little over 1%. If you think about it in terms of plunging, back in 2008 and 2009, the market was at 10,000, dropping 600 or 700 points a day. Now, that was a plunge. Today at 1%, that's not a plunge. I mean, people get all excited about it because the market's been going up and suddenly we go down 1%. Come on, give me a break. I've got more to talk about on the market later in the program. I want to talk about earnings. I want to talk about what's going on there. I want to talk about what's going on Wall Street. Got a great guest today who's got a great story. And I've got things to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about today. So a couple of weeks ago, we were in Boston. Now, instead of giving Christmas presents to my family and to my children and grandchildren, we do a family trip. And we did a trip once on the Alaska cruise. We did Costa Rica. We did Washington, D.C. This year it was to Boston. And in Boston, we walked the Freedom Trail one day, walked past Paul Revere's house. And it brought to mind to me that poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, which we had to memorize when I was in school, Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive that remembers that famous day and year of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Remember that poem? Maybe you had to memorize it too. But then, from a book written by a University of Washington professor, he writes, imagine for a moment it's 1923. Al Capone is assembling an army of gun-loading henchmen in Chicago, and they'll number 700 before he's through. Cotton farmers in the South are sunk in a depression. The Ku Klux Klan is on the rise. Newspaper headlines tell of corruption in the Veterans Bureau. The director had to resign. Rumors in the Capitol hint of the coming Teapot Dome scandal. And eventually, 2 secretaries in the cabinet would go to jail convicted of corruption. But these are not the things that concern the President of the United States. What worries Warren Harding, who is touring the country on a campaign swing that proves to be his last, what worries Warren Harding is a recent attack on the legend of Paul Revere. An iconoclast had noted that Revere never completed that ride. He never completed that ride that was made famous by Longfellow. Before giving warning to Concord, Revere was discovered by the British and captured. Harding, however, told the crowd he didn't care. He didn't care. I love the story of Paul Revere, the president intoned in his most presidential-sounding voice. I love Paul Revere, whether he wrote or not. Now, today we may be scandalized that Harding was in 1923, but I think we're less cynical than we think we are. The evidence suggests that we are just as susceptible to mythology as Americans were in the past. And the danger isn't that we have myths. The danger is hiding from the fact that they are myths. All that comes from a book written by Richard Schenkman, wrote it in 1991, called I Love Paul Revere, whether he wrote or not. So I started my career at Payne Weber. I was a stock jockey, and I moved from there. I was buying and selling stocks. I moved from there to Dane Bosworth, where I began to manage money on a fee basis. And from there I went to Evren, which was bought by First Union, which was bought by Wachovia, which combined with Prudential Securities to become Wachovia Securities. And I was in the process of managing my accounts, manage my client accounts. And when I was recruited from Dane to Evren, the back office from Dane had moved to Evren. They knew my track record. They knew how well I'd done for clients. And they wanted me to come to Evren. And so I did. I liked the back office. I liked the back office people. But when First Union bought Evren, they did away with that same back office people. They'd scattered to the wind. And they installed their own people. And they installed their own set of regulations and guidelines for their accounts. But because of my track record, they grandfathered me and let me do what I wanted to do with my client accounts. Then came Wachovia, and when Wachovia was running things, they grandfathered me too. Then came the combination with Wachovia Securities. And Wachovia Securities Compliance came to me and said, you have to come into compliance. We can't grandfather you anymore. And I said, what can I do? The number 2 guy in all of Wachovia Securities came out and had lunch with me. I wasn't a huge broker, but he came out and had lunch with me, and we sat down, we talked. And it took me a while to figure this out while we were sitting at lunch. Why was this guy talking to me? And I finally asked him, I said, why are you talking to me? I said, what's my track record? And in big brokerage firms, they don't allow you to publish your track record because that would cause all sorts of problems for the brokerage firms. He said to me, you have the best track record of any manager in Wachovia Securities. And I said, why don't you allow all the other brokers to do what I do? And they said, because you have 20 years experience and we have to design a program for the person that has only 6 months. So I said, there's a couple things I can do. One, you can grandfather me and I'll stay with Wachovia Securities. I said, secondly, on the 2 days before the end of the quarter, I will sell everything in my client accounts, come into compliance with what Wachovia Securities wants. And then on the first day of the new quarter, I'll sell what I bought 2 days before and buy back what I had before. I said, or the third thing I can do is I can go out on my own. And they said, no, don't go out on your own. Boom, boom. And anyway, we had a number of discussions. The upshot was I did go out on my own. Now, the point of giving that whole story is that the decision that Wachovia Securities made was not in the best interest of my clients, because if I would have come under their guidelines, my clients would not have had the performance that they've had over the years. It would have been worse. And I bring up that story and the myth of the big firms selling the idea that they have the client's best interest in mind. That's not true. And that comes to light because the Department of Labor Fiduciary Rule is under attack again. Here we go again. Now, during the Obama administration, they did a study and they found that it was costing participants in 401k programs $17 billion a year. $17 billion a year. And so Obama sent a letter to the Department of Labor and said, develop a fiduciary standard. And they did. And the fiduciary standard was over 800 pages long. And with the new administration coming into effect, the first thing they did is they wanted to reevaluate it and then delay it. And that's where we are now. There was an executive order to look at the entire fiduciary rule, and it's very controversial. That $17 billion was going to the banks, the insurance companies, and the brokerage houses, which were managing 401ks. It was coming out of participant pockets. Now, if you look at where we are, there are approximately 72 million participants, 483,000 plans. And the issue is, with those plans, 54% of U.S. workers have less than $25,000 in retirement savings. 27% have less than $1,000. plan participation is less than 75%. And the average balance for those who are retiring after 30 years, their average balance is $144,000. That means they're going to have a retirement of $500 a month. Those are the issues which brought about the Fiduciary Rule under the Department of Labor. And I sat in the meeting. I went to the National Association of Pension Advisors, and I was in the main committee meeting with people who generated a lot of the verbiage and a lot of the information that went into those 800 pages. They were really proud of those 800 pages. That was almost everything that they wrote. 800 pages. To me, it seemed, if you're writing a fiduciary rule, it should be one sentence. One simple sentence. Everything should be done in the best interest of the client. But that's not how the fiduciary rule reads. It's 800 pages long. What does it mean to be in the best interest of the client? It defines conflicts of interest. It defines equal charges, equal commissions. It goes through the whole thing. Not that it is as simple as being in the best interest of the client. So what is going on? Well, we're coming to a commercial break. I'll come back right after commercial break and talk about that. Don't go away.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Did you know the 20-year annualized S&P return was 8.19%, while the 20-year annualized return for the average equity mutual fund investor was just 4.67%? That's a gap of 3.52%. It doesn't sound like much now, but it could mean the difference between retiring in comfort and running out of money. For some seniors, a gap that large could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and cut their retirement short. Don't run out of money. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today, 206-903-1019, and learn more about how you can, 1, create wealth for retirement, and 2, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Examples not available in all states. Results.
We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I've been talking about the fiduciary rule passed by the Department of Labor, the delays in it, 401ks. You know, studies show the number one concern of people today, workers today, is running out of money. They don't want to run out of money. You know, it's the number one concern. And the findings are that people are 5 times more likely to stay in the same company, not look for other employment, if they have a really good 401k. Those are what the studies are showing. And Vanguard's just done a study where they're showing, in order to compete, a lot of employers are increasing the match. They're doing auto enrollment. They're doing a lot of things to keep it going. And I don't talk a lot about what we do. You know, most of the reason for this program is informational. But I can tell you that for the 401ks that we have, what we've seen is the turnover in our 401ks has gone down. Now because I take a sense of pride and ownership of it, I say it's because of the 401ks. I'm not sure it's all because of the 401ks, but it's had an impact. It's a small sample. You can't say for sure it's because of the 401ks, but I believe that there's some validation to that. But the whole thing is coming back to the fiduciary rule. And for this whole thing, it's the big brokerage firms, it's the insurance companies, it's the banks who have so much on the line. $17 billion they've been making from participants and from investors. And there's been a lot of pushback. Even after the rule was implemented and put into place, there were half a dozen lawsuits that were filed against it. They lobbied senators and congressmen to try to get the rule overturned in Congress. And there's been so much pushback. And the firms themselves are saying that they have just the client's best interest in mind. But you know what? The Attorney General of the state of New York wanted to change the language to say, for anyone who is not a fiduciary, and most plans say we're not fiduciaries. Anyway, he wanted people to put out a thing that said, I am not a fiduciary, therefore I'm not required to act in your best interest, and I'm allowed to recommend investments that may earn higher fees for me or my firm, even if those investments may not have the best combination of fees, risk, and expected return for you. That was the Attorney General of the state of New York. You know, a lot of that's gone on. And when those firms, those same firms that say and advertise that they have the client's best interest in mind, that also has proven wrong. When it comes to the point that they go to court and are sued over that, they turn around and say we're not fiduciaries. The Public Investors Arbitration Bar Association had a call for action, and they looked at 9 firms: Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, Ameriprise, Morgan Stanley, Allstate, Schwab, UBS, and Wells Fargo. Their ads all say that they're trusted fiduciaries acting in the best interest of their clients. But their non-public arbitration denied the duty. You know, Joseph Pfeiffer, the president of the Public Investors Arbitration Bar Association, said in over 500 cases, the people that were suing or going to arbitration against the big firms lost 75% of the time. You know, that's devastating because the firms would say they are not acting as fiduciaries. You know, the Merrill Lynch ad says it's time for a financial strategy that puts your needs and priorities front and center. But when it comes to arbitration, they say, we're not fiduciaries. You know, it's all up to you. We had, and we have, a Department of Labor fiduciary rule. Not the best in my opinion, but at least something better than exists. But we're seeing a lot of pushback by the big brokerage firms, by the banks, and the insurance companies. I don't know how it's going to come out. I know that the number one concern for participants is not running out of money in their retirement. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that, I want to change. I want to introduce my guest because she has an interesting story to tell. Anna Stephanie is the founder of Leave Logic. Welcome to the program, Anna.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So why don't we start with your background?
Sure. So I studied finance and technology and had a variety of roles in both those areas at companies like Travelers Insurance and Microsoft. One of those roles took me to London, lived there for a couple of years, but it wasn't until I ended up moving to Germany. And I was working for Microsoft at the time, and my husband and I got married, and we were having our first son there. And when I started understanding what I was entitled to in terms of parental leave, I got to make some great choices. I was entitled to 1 year of job-protected leave and up to 3 years, 1 year of government stipend leave and 3 years job-protected leave. And that was really important as I was going into this journey of motherhood for the first time. I didn't feel I had to make a decision between having a family and my career. I was very career-oriented. I wanted to continue excelling in my roles and gaining more and more responsibility, but I was allowed this time to take off to have a child. Well, after that year, I was promoted and offered a role here in the United States. And it was then, after a couple of years, we were considering having another child back here at headquarters. And it was when I started asking colleagues and friends, what are my options in this country? I'd lived in Germany now for 8 years. And what I found was repeatedly I was told to keep it hidden as long as possible. And I didn't know what it was at first. And it was the baby. And how was I supposed to do that? Buy bigger clothes? And I didn't understand what the big issue was. And it was, performance reviews are coming, or you don't want to tell your boss or your manager too early. And so we still have a lot of taboos in the workplace around it. And that's when I really stopped and analyzed this and looked at how I felt going through this life event in a different country, same company. And we have a lot of work to do there.
So you formed Leave Logic.
Yes.
So tell us about Leave Logic.
So one of those challenges that I faced was access to information, transparency. How do I make Microsoft's great policies personal to me? And I could do it by asking lots of people, following other people in the bathroom and saying, hey, tell me how it really works here. But I really think there's a role technology has a huge role to play in helping make family leave easier on companies and employees. You were mentioning the 401k earlier. I think one of the hardest parts about a 401k is understanding its value as an employee. When you retire and you're actually taking the money out, then there's value. But the pre-planning part is really hard to convey unless you have a decision support tool that says, if you put in this amount of money, you will have this at retirement. And those decision support tools were critical to the industry and increasing utilization. That's essentially what we're doing for family leave for employees, is helping them self-serve those decisions, almost like mini retirement, and understanding their options and benefits available to them.
So let's talk about some of the specifics in this. If you can say there's any specifics. You're designing each program for individual companies.
Right. So we have a standardized onboarding process. We sit down and collect the programs, your handbook and policies, and then we go away and configure that in a build specific to your company that's scalable across different employee types and states. And we handle all of those state changes on behalf of your employees. So when they come in, let's say January 1st in 2018 in New York, and they log into Leave Logic, they're experiencing a life event, we will be showing them the new New York State paid leave law. And we're increasingly finding it's challenging for employers to keep up with all of the law changes. We've just in the last 2 years had D.C., New York, and now Washington State. And the compliance risk is extremely high if you're not communicating those rights and benefit programs to your employees. On average, some violations could run around $600,000 per violation.
Wow, that's very significant.
Yeah.
So what you mentioned, New York, D.C., and Washington State. So what's happening in those three areas?
It's really exciting because each one of those states is different. I mean, I find it exciting. But what we're finding is there's different programs happening to date in California, New Jersey, Rhode Island. We've seen disability insurance programs be the model for states to adopt to roll out paid family leave benefits. And DC is its own version. So where states typically cover employees who are working in a state, DC is covering employees who work in DC. So now you're providing a benefit for employees in Virginia, Maryland, and we don't know what's going to happen there. And so we're waiting for that one to roll out to really see how the impact works. And then Washington State is using an unemployment insurance model to roll out paid family leave. And there's quite a bit of innovation behind that. It's the first of its kind in the United States, and we think it will also show about 11 other states a viable way to roll out their versions of paid family leave.
So when you talk about paid family leave, what are we talking about?
So right now in the United States, there is no nationally mandated paid leave program. All we have is the FMLA, the Federal Medical Leave Act, that was started in 1991 by President Clinton. And what that provides is 12 weeks of job-protected leave. And what we're finding is that those same leave reasons, so if you're having a child or if you yourself are sick or you're going to care for your parent, these states are providing those paid benefits to their residents.
Keep that thought.
Yes.
We're coming to commercial break, and we'll be right back, and we'll hear more about paid leave.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I'm here with Anna Stephanie talking about leave logic. And we started to talk about the paid parental leave. And you talked about different states and DC having different approaches to this. What is the difference between the different approach here? Tell us why the approach is different and why it makes a difference.
I think the biggest difference is really going to be with the New York paid leave law implementation. So New York is a disability state, unlike California, where a centralized government agency manages the payments and disbursements on those disability programs. New York works with carriers, private carriers, and the New York disability market. And paid family leave is a brand new product line for many of these carriers. And they're challenged with, how do we implement this? How do we case manage it? How do we prove that someone had a child? How do we prove that someone has a sick parent? And so they're working on that right now. And so there's some of those challenges there, as well as the size of employers that are eligible. It's very different in New York. It's any company over the size of 2 employees. Any employee who works at least 20 hours a week. These are different eligibility rules than we would see for FMLA, for example. So you may be an employer or an employee thinking that I don't have to worry about this until I'm over 50 employees, but that in New York specifically is not the case. Now, we go to Washington State. Washington State's going to be implementing it on an unemployment insurance model, not a disability model. And so I believe you need to start withholding that in paychecks in 2019. And so right now the state is trying to figure out how they're going to be implementing it. What are options for employers in implementing that? But something to keep in mind if you're an employer or an employee, that these laws are ever changing very quickly, sometimes at the city level.
And so the city of Seattle might have something different than the city of Bellevue or Renton or Everett.
And that's what our legislative and policymakers need to really figure out. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the United States has had a vacuum around a national paid leave policy. And so what we're seeing is, like the city of San Francisco, they're implementing their own paid family leave policy. We don't think this is conducive to either that we think it helps create pressure for the national policy, but it's really challenging to administrate and make sure employees are informed of what their rights are.
So let's talk about leave logic and how you fit with all this.
Right. So today, the industry, the carrier industry or the third-party administrator industry really has been architected to root out fraud and absenteeism and reduce costs. That is not very conducive to an employee experience or achieving employee retentions or the talent management strategy goals around paid leave. Contrast that, though, with what we're seeing in the industry. We're starting to see more and more companies announce expanded paid leave programs, not just in technology, but in more traditional municipalities or casinos or oil and gas, for example. what these employers face is that they're making those policy choices on a talent management basis. So they're trying to attract and retain talent. But the tools and solutions they have to date to achieve that is more around an insurance experience. And as we know, that's always very confusing and difficult. And so what we do at LeaveLogic is we have a way for employees to self-serve their information in a very nice user experience with the software and understand how much time they get off, how much is paid, what benefits are available to them. That discovery process is a big burden on employees. Sometimes we've heard quoted up to 20 hours is spent per employee just on the discovery process. In addition, HR is having to field all these incoming questions. Oh, I heard we have a new paid leave policy. What should I do? The only way you can appropriately scale that today without something like LeaveLogic is add more FTE. And that's not really feasible for many employers. So we're
FTE.
Full-time equivalents, more
Okay.
employees. Thank you. And so what we're finding is that employers are looking for a technology solution to help them scale and standardize the employee leave experience.
So let's take it down to the specifics. If I'm at a company and I need to have surgery and I know I'm going to miss 2 weeks of work, what goes on?
Well, first, you may have some questions. What do I need to tell my manager? Who do I need to go talk to in HR? If your employer has LeaveLogic, you would click on a link and we would ask you a few brief questions. Tell us what type of leave you're considering taking. In this instance, it would be a personal illness. And then once you tell us that, what type of dates are you looking at? And then we would know where you're located, what your company policy is, what benefits are available to you. And then after you give us those few bits of information, then we create a customized, individualized experience for you that shows you exactly, okay, you would be able to take these 2 weeks and you will be paid through your short-term disability policy, for example. That may be supplemented by a state program. We'd help you understand how to file those forms, when to file those forms, what doctor certification letters you would need in order to get that income, which is critical. And it's actually the last thing you want to do when you're considering, when you're going to have surgery. These are the most vulnerable times in employees' lives and careers where they have a very little support to navigate a complex income replacement vehicle as well as benefits in the workplace. And then we would show you what benefits are available. Maybe there's a health advocacy program through your health carrier or something that your employer has enrolled you in, and that would help you find maybe a second opinion, and maybe you wouldn't need surgery. These are all things that at that point of administration, we think can really help the employee navigate. Whereas today you'd have to know that existed, right? You'd have to know that existed at your place of employment and magically go find it.
And maybe you just don't want to talk to anybody because you don't know what the outcome's going to be. You don't want to go to somebody and say, I need surgery. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks.
You bring
and
up,
have them say, bye.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point. One of the secret sauces that LeaveLogic has is that an employee can enter our solution confidentially and choose to share their leave plan when they're ready with HR or their manager. That confidential piece is so critical because, like you said, you don't want to disclose what type of surgery, right? You know, when we first started in the industry, some of the biggest leave reasons were due to back pain or knee replacements. And in the last 2 years, that has switched to opioid abuse, mental health, addiction. These are things you don't necessarily want to offer up to your employer that you're going through, but they're very real life occurrences. And so how can we match these great benefits that are provided through employee assistance programs, through health carriers, and other personal medical illness paid leave policies? How can we get those matched to that employee exactly when they need them in a respectful way?
So we've been talking about paid leave, but do you take it beyond that in terms of benefits?
Yes, I think that binary, do you have a paid leave program or not, is just the beginning. One thing we love to do with employers is solution roadmap with them and right size not only policy, but benefits based on their population and goals they're trying to achieve, whether it's attraction or retention, Or they look at the existing maybe verbatims from their employees. We help them say, well, you don't necessarily need to increase the paid leave amount that you're offering. You could actually include a health advocacy program, or the variety of parental leave benefits out there is amazing. There's things from FedExing breast milk for mothers who have to travel to, very plush lactation rooms. All of these really contribute to the employee experience beyond just the paid benefit.
Well, thank you very much. Size of employer that would use this?
Really horizontal, so anywhere from 50 employees up to 50,000. Really, we target employers who are having employees who are taking leave. So anyone.
And if someone is listening to the program that thinks that they may use this or may have a use for it, how would they contact you?
We'd love to hear from you at leavelogic.com.
And leave is spelled?
Leave.
Okay.
Thank you.
And employers of 50 to 50,000 or more.
That's right.
So great. Thanks for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's filling a need which there hasn't been anything there before.
That's right.
Thank you. So I want to return to the stock market for just a little bit and talk about earnings. Earnings for the quarter were up 12%. That is a really good return. 12% earnings, we haven't seen that for a couple of years. And if you talk about the stock market doing well, it's driven by earnings. Bull markets, secular bull markets like we're in, and we began this bull market in 2009. The previous secular bull market was from 1982 to 2000. And prior to that, 1942 to 1966. They don't last a short time. They're born on pessimism, when people feel that things are only going to get worse, things are terrible, we're in a mess, the stock market's going to go to zero, put your money in a can in the backyard and bury it. It's born on pessimism, and it grows on skepticism. It grows on the fact people don't believe it's going to continue to go up. And here we are, 8 years later, and the market is still up, and it's more than doubled. And it matures on optimism. People are beginning to feel good right now about what's going on. We've seen this go on for 8 years. We're beginning to feel good. They die on euphemism. They die on that feeding frenzy, on the frothiness. We're not anywhere close to that. We've got a ways to go. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away. I've got more coming back, and I want to talk about tax reform. So stay with me.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
How do you picture retirement? House on the beach, small farm in the country, traveling the world with your spouse. The one thing you don't picture is running out of money. Retirement dreams are shattered all too often by poor investment choices, sending many retirees back to work. If you think the job market is tough now, try entering it after you've retired. Don't run out of money. Start planning now. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today at 206-903-1019 and learn more about how you can create wealth for retirement and, probably most importantly, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, tax reform. That's one of the big hot topics that's going on today, because the administration has laid out a program, a timetable, that they want to have tax reform done by the end of this year. When they said that, you have to think about what's gone on in the past with tax reform. And disregarding what was said about Charlottesville and the dissolution of the councils, just looking at tax reform itself, it's not just an administrative concern, it's a concern of the Republican Party, it's a concern as of the Democrat Party as well. There's concern all across the way. But beyond that, the last time we had real tax reform was 1986 under Ronald Reagan. They reduced tax rates, but they offset it by eliminating a lot of tax deductions. It was a bipartisan Congress at that time. You know, there's little indication today that there's going to be a bipartisan approach to tax reform. The Democrats say for sure they want the top 1% not to get a tax cut. But that's one of the main goals of the Republicans, is to see that tax cuts are made across the board. You know, and in order to offset tax cuts, if you're going to have a revenue neutral, which means the revenues are going to continue on, you have to do away with a lot of deductions. And deductions are really difficult. Deductions are extremely difficult because, you know, I don't mind giving up some of the deductions for someone else's business. I don't mind if someone else gets their tax deduction removed, but my tax reduction, deductions, I want to keep all of mine. You have all the special interest groups who form and go through this whole thing, and they're willing for someone else to give up their tax reduction just as long as it doesn't affect them. It's not going to be easy. It wasn't easy during the Reagan time. And remember, the first George Bush, who said, "Read my lips, there'll be no tax increase." In order to get things passed, there was a tax increase. You know, there's a process that has to take place. There's a lot of compromises that have to be done, and that takes time and effort. You know, the administration would like to get tax reform done by the end of the year. My guess is that if we're going to have tax reform done, it's going to take 2 or 3 or 5 years. It's not going to be something that moves very quickly. That's my opinion. But I believe that it's going to be one of those things that business really looks at in a big way. Businesses really are positive and behind tax reform. I think it's almost, I don't know, I don't want to say crazy, but we tend to focus on tax reform and stimulus and interest rates. I think there's a whole lot of other things that can be done in business, to stimulate growth, that are not necessarily tax reform. Anyway, we'll see where this goes. We're just at the very beginning. So Mark Twain, shifting gears, Mark Twain actually said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch the basket. You know, if you look at some of the great investors of the past, Warren Buffett, Templeton, Price, the great investors, they put their eggs in one basket and they watched the basket. They said the more you know about securities, the less diversification you have. They had vision. Everyone was different. We talk about that whole process of what's gone on. But if you look at where we are, if you look at what's gone on with the market, in the 20th century, and history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, so we can look back and see what happened. If you look at the 20th century, we went through a Great Depression. We went through numerous recessions. In our lifetime, the 1990s, the 1980s, the 1960s, the 1970s, we saw recessions, but we also saw this great secular bull market from 1982 to 2000. And if you're old enough, you remember the bull market from 1942 to 1966. They lasted a long time. But even with that, we went through 2 world wars. We went through Vietnam. We went through Korea. We went through multiple worldwide conflicts. We saw communism and we saw the Cold War. During the 20th century, we saw 2 presidential assassinations. We saw nuclear plants melt down, Chernobyl. We had the problem at 3 Mile Island. We had all of that. We had a multitude of problems and issues, unpredictable. And with all those negatives, the Dow started on January 1st, 1900. The Dow stood at 66. And on December 31st, 1999, the Dow stood at 11,667. Think about that. 66 to 11,467. All those negatives, Great Recessions, wars, communism, Cold War, presidential assassinations. And yet we saw in that 20th century, we saw the positives happen. We saw things change. We saw the emergence of the internal combustion engine, which is probably on the deathbed. It's on its way out. We saw the rise of computers, from a time of hand calculators to computers which computated tremendous amounts of data. We saw a change in biology, from polio vaccines to biomedical. The average mortality in 1909 was 47 years of age. Now it's almost twice that. We saw a change in transportation. One of the huge problems that existed in 1900, if you look at the cities with the transportation of the horse, you had piles of manure that were 40 and 60 feet high. The smell of the disease that surrounded that, we saw that change with the internal combustion engine and onward into travel by aircraft. We saw people walking on the moon. There's been a whole list of positives. And during that time, the Dow went from 66 to 467. With all the negatives, we're offset with positives. I believe we're in a secular bull market today. I've been talking about it for the last 7 years. I think we're just in the middle of that. We're in the optimistic part. We've got a ways to go. So hang on. We've got positive things coming. So if you missed any part of this program or some of the other programs, you'll find the podcast and you'll find information and blogs on the website. Go look at that, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. And stick with us. We've got many more things coming in the next few weeks. We've got great guests. We've got more to talk about. And during these times when things seem to be going screwy in Washington, D.C., we still have a very strong economy. And the world has a strong economy as well. I'll be back next week. Be sure and join us then. And until then, have a great weekend and a great early week.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again for more About Money with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
1300 KKOL.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The following program